From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. This is a story that the government didn't want you to hear.
This really was unprecedented. No superinjunction has remained in place for this long. It's been incredibly difficult to get this story out, and it's just amazing to be able to tell it finally.
This is a story about people, Afghan people, the government had a responsibility to protect. It's a story that really begins in the summer of 2021, when Kabul fell to the Taliban, and the Afghans who'd been helping British forces now found that their lives were under threat. We spoke to one at the time.
To be honest, we are kind of counting the moments to get killed by Taliban. And we cannot leave. We will get killed. And no hope left. No hope left.
The government set up a scheme to relocate as many of these Afghans as possible. But it was clear, even then, that many of them wouldn't make it, as a tearful Ben Wallace, then the Defence Secretary, admitted at the time.
At the very least, our obligation has to be as many of these people through the pipeline as possible. But I think I also said, and it's a really deep part of regret for me, that some people won't get back. Some people won't get back.
We knew these Afghans were in grave danger. What we didn't know was how much worse the threat was about to become. After a long, complex and secret legal battle, spearheaded by the Times, we can finally reveal how a leak from the British military, 6 months after the fall of Kabul, placed the lives of 100,000 Afghans at risk.
The Taliban were going around looking for individuals who had been working with NATO, so there was no doubt that they were at risk. Providing the Taliban with a list would have made their job that much easier. There may still be Afghans who are in Afghanistan who are on the list, who haven't made it, who will be under threat.
How did successive governments manage to cover up news of the leak that could have risked the lives of 100,000 Afghans and could have cost the taxpayer £7 billion? The story today, The Afghan Files, how I took on the government and won.
I'm Larisa Brown, and I am the defence editor at The Times. I've been reporting on the Afghans for a decade now. I was first revealing what they were going through in Afghanistan back when I was at the Daily Mail, and then I continued to tell their stories when I moved over to The Times a few years ago. And I have also written a book, The Gardener of Lashkar, which is about the Afghans who served alongside the UK forces during the war and what they've been through.
Larisa, it was while you were finishing that book that you first became aware of this story. Just describe what happened when you went to the MOD with it.
I was on maternity leave at the time, and I was about to publish the book, and I was told that there had been an unprecedented data breach. I knew that there was a legal case ongoing. I knew that there was no chance of us being able to report it whilst I was away. I returned from maternity leave and rang the Ministry of Defence. I rang someone that I speak to often. I'd known him for years. And at that point, I had no idea of the severity of the story, what was going to happen next. I didn't know that he was writing down the details of what I was saying. And I told him that I was aware that there was a superinjunction, that there was a risk to the lives of thousands of Afghans, and that I wanted to be involved in the case. And shortly after that, I was informed that I needed to come into the Ministry of Defence urgently and that I needed a lawyer. Now, I've been covering defence for many, many years, and I've never been told that before.
That's not a normal request.
Not at all. So me and Pia Sarma, who's our editorial legal director, went to the MOD not really knowing exactly what to expect.
What happens when you walk in?
We ended up being taken into a room, and we had to hand in our phones and electronic devices. And then we were basically faced with a legal team from the MOD. These weren't press officers, these were lawyers. And
how many?
A handful. The room was pretty full. It was pretty daunting, actually, at that point. And we were told that we were going to be served with a superinjunction. And we were asked at that point how we had come to know about the superinjunction and the data breach. Obviously, we are journalists. I didn't need to tell them how I came to know about it, but I did put them at ease to say that I'd known about it for some time, and me knowing about it didn't suggest that there'd been a wider breach of the information.
What did they say to you before you left? I mean, what does it mean to be served with a superinjunction?
What they basically explained is that if you tell anyone that the data breach has happened or that a court order exists preventing that information from being published, then you can end up going to jail.
So there is no way of getting even a hint of this story, or even a hint of the fact that the MOD is trying to stop a story out to the public?
No way. I mean, I didn't tell anyone. You know, I've been working on this for so long. I've been going to court hearings. I haven't told my husband about the nature of it all. He didn't have a clue what I was doing, my parents. Even here at the Times, we could only inform very, very few people. And those few people that knew about it, we had to give those names to the court.
Larisa, take us back to how this story first became a problem for the MOD. Take us back to the summer of 2023, and someone only referred to as Person A in court documents finds out that there's been a leak. How did that happen? How did she learn about it?
What happened is an Afghan posted a message on Facebook in a Facebook group, and he said in this group that he had a database of 33,000 applications and that he wanted to disclose it. There were 33,000 applications. There were around 18,000 principal applicants, so individuals that were applying to come to the UK. But if you take into account their family members, then it's potentially up to 100,000 people at risk of death and torture. Now, I think people in this group were a bit surprised by what he was saying, but then what he did next was he actually published several rows of the database, and this really alarmed Afghans in the group. And one of them actually was on this database, and he ended up getting in touch with Person A. She's named in court documents as Person A. She's an activist, and he wanted to find out, what was going on.
So this is an Afghan who's applied to be able to come to Britain because he'd helped British forces, who suddenly sees his own details popping up on Facebook from another Afghan.
Yes, it was his father whose details were exposed in that Facebook post. And he was then telling Person A about this, and they ended up having this exchange about these details and about what exactly this person might know. And that is when Person A then ends up alerting everyone she can in the UK government, because she says, and in fact she sends an email to James Heappey, the Armed Forces Minister at the time, she fears that the Taliban could get their hands on a 33,000 strong kill list. She was worried that the Taliban could get hold of this list and start working their way through the list and start killing people.
How do ministers like James Heappey respond when they learn about that?
Well, at this point, they don't know what's happened. They've got no idea why this Afghan has got hold of this list and what exactly they've got. So there's obviously extreme concern inside the MOD. And there then, is this operation to try and find out what happened. There's an investigation. The security services are pulled in. I'm told that spies had to try and find out, who had got this list and try and delete it from servers overseas. And then they basically managed to pinpoint it to a incident which happened 18 months earlier in February 2022.
Tell us about that, because at this point I imagine they must be worrying about whether a foreign government has managed to crack their system, how on earth this information has got out. What did they learn about how that leak first took place?
What they found out is that a soldier, a regular soldier, who was actually under the under the command of the Director of Special Forces, who at the time was General Sir Gwyn Jenkins, the current head of the Navy. He was basically trying to verify applications to the UK, and he was messaging Afghans that he knew to ask them whether those individuals had actually served alongside the UK forces. And this soldier inadvertently sent this list of 33,000 cases, applications to Afghans in the UK, and then they forwarded on the list to Afghans in Afghanistan. And obviously he did not know at that point what exactly he had done, because apparently there was a hidden set of information, and he did not realise that he was passing on 33,000 cases.
Wow, and suddenly that's out there, starting with Afghans in Britain, spreading to people in Afghanistan. How did that list end up popping up on Facebook 18 months later?
That detail we don't know about. It's been really unclear throughout the hearings. They've never gone into any of this detail about how the data breach occurred. They've never mentioned the soldier. They've never mentioned any of this. This is what we've managed to gather from conversations that we've been able to have with a very small number of people. That work is ongoing to find out exactly who this person was and where they are now.
But by this stage, it's not just the man on Facebook. Quite a few Afghans in Afghanistan have that list. Tell us about one of them who had applied to come to Britain and had his application rejected.
This is an Afghan father of 3, and he, as you say, had his application for sanctuary rejected. He had sent an email to the MOD, and actually the significance of this email was not discovered until months and months later. But he had sent an email saying that he knew that the 33,000 cases had potentially leaked, that there had been this massive data breach. And he was saying that we are miraculously still alive due to our wit and pure luck. And he said, it's like we are evolving in an open tomb. Now, that was an email that he sent to the MOD shortly after this data breach was discovered. There was also an Afghan who had been sent the list, and he was brought to the UK. He was brought to the UK with 7 members of his family. And it wasn't exactly clear how he ended up with that list. But when he touched down in the UK, they made sure that his laptop didn't have the list on it. They deleted it to make sure that the list couldn't go any further.
He wasn't the only one who had the list out there. It had clearly spread, even in Afghanistan. Some people were starting to worry that the Taliban might have it too. Give us a sense of how people were being targeted around then.
It's really hard to know whether the Taliban have the list, and if they do have the list, when they might have got it. Obviously now there is a concern that the Taliban will try and get that list. You know, over the hearings, over the months, the MOD was quite confident that they didn't believe that the Taliban had it. But there was other information that suggested that they might, and Person A, who was named in court documents, the female activist, whom I have known for some time, she was convinced that the Taliban had got it, and she believed that they were already working their way through that kill list. Now, we haven't been able to verify her thoughts, but the judge did say at one point that, you know, it was possible, basically, that the Taliban had the list, and we didn't know about it.
And for the people on the ground, most of them weren't told by the government that their information might be out there. Some were being alerted to it by activists who knew that there had been this data breach. Give us a sense of how some of these people were having to live.
The vast majority of people never knew about the data breach at all. A very small number were told initially, and then they decided not to tell anymore. But generally, there has been Afghans who worked alongside the UK forces have for a long time been very worried about attacks by the Taliban. They've been branded infidels, spies for the British, traitors. And Person A said that they were living their lives like they were in a Jason Bourne film. They were hiding in caves. They were terrified that the Taliban could come and hunt them down and find them.
Larisa, we've been talking about the details of this leak. This is a story you have spent a decade covering, especially since the summer of 2021 when Western forces withdrew and so many of the people who had helped Western forces, British forces in Afghanistan, were suddenly left to try to save themselves. Give us a sense from all the people you've spoken to of just the sort of dangers that these people were facing.
Over the years, we've reported, how they've been shot at, chased, tortured, imprisoned, in some cases killed, family members targeted. These people have been through an awful lot over the years, and that's why a lot of them were applying for sanctuary in the UK, because they were desperate to leave the country. They believed that their lives were at risk, and of course they were helping the UK forces fight during the war, but then when the UK forces pulled out and the Taliban swept to power, their lives were in danger more than ever. And I receive so many messages from Afghans, even now, all the time, of people just desperate to come to the UK whose cases have been rejected. And it's quite emotional speaking to a lot of them. Some of them I've known for a long time. Some of them have been waiting in hotels in Pakistan to come for a very long time. These people are generally, they're really miserable, they're terrified, they're scared. And I think what's very concerning about all of this is they're obviously learning about this data breach today. They don't know the full details, and they're going to be wondering, what do we do next with our lives? Do we run? Do we stay at home? What do we do with our families?
That must have been something that the MOD was worried about when they were alerted to this breach. Just describe what they decided to do about it. How did they go about trying to rectify what had happened with this leak?
The MOD decided they didn't want the details of the leak to get out, that if the Taliban knew about the existence of the leak, then they would try and find that list and they might be able to get hold of it. And then they would start targeting people. So their concern was the Taliban finding out. Now, obviously that meant not telling the Afghans that their data had been breached. And that raised the risk of the Taliban suddenly finding out, and then the Afghans not having that opportunity to have moved or changed their details in advance. Suddenly they could have this knock at the door from the Taliban, and they'd never known that they were at risk. And that was a point really that the judge made last year as he decided to lift the superinjunction, but then the Conservative government appealed that decision just before the general election, and the Court of Appeal ruled in their favour, so it continued.
So the MOD went about trying to fix this by basically trying to stop the news getting out by launching this superinjunction. When you and Pierce Armour, extraordinary lawyer at large at the Times, when you got involved, just describe how you took that on and why you felt it was so important for this to be public knowledge.
So we came in January 2024 in terms of, going to those hearings. I really felt that the Afghans deserved to know about it. And I stood up in court, and others also stood up from the Daily Mail, the Independent and global media. This was quite unusual, but actually the judge allowed the media, who were not yet defendants, and we didn't officially have legal representation, to address him. And I said that I was really concerned about the upcoming general election, and, I believed it to be an election issue. And, this was a huge error that had enormous implications on quite divisive policy areas such as immigration, and the hotels. And I also said that the court's order prevented public scrutiny of decision-making on these important topics.
And how on earth is this not in the public interest?
It's quite amazing that it's remained in place for this long, and I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about whether it should have remained in place for so long. When we really realised what was going on, there was a decision made that the media needed to become defendants rather than just mere observers to the court process. And that's when Pia took hold of this story. She really spearheaded the media's legal fight. She has been pretty formidable over the months. She ended up appointing a barrister, Jude Bunting, And from then on, we basically argued our case in all of the hearings. We made sure that we were arguing that it needed to be lifted. There was a public interest case. There was also a private interest case. The Afghans didn't know what was happening. And it was a really lengthy fight. There were points when we thought it was going to obviously be lifted. We were preparing for that. And then suddenly it wouldn't be. So there were lots of highs and lows over the months. And obviously we've been really preparing for this moment for a long time.
So essentially, I suppose it comes down to the argument that the public should know about this because public money is being spent, a mistake has been made, and there's no accountability, but also that the Afghans who could be affected need to be alerted about this, which they're not being at the moment. And the government's case is that if news of the list gets out, the Taliban will know, and that starts this process. Mm-hmm. Give us a sense of what the MOD was doing in the background to prepare for that moment when the list might go public.
They prepared, extensively. Today, before the injunction actually lifted, Afghans started receiving messages. And I was sent one of those messages. They're being told in Afghanistan, these are tens of thousands of people being told suddenly that their data's been breached. And so they've been preparing for several years to find a way to inform these people. There's been so much discussion about how they could tell them. And just in terms of, the briefings, John Healey standing up in the Commons, they've obviously been preparing for those elements for an awful long time. We had briefings really late in the evening yesterday, which is quite unusual for MOD civil servants. We were, called into the MOD after court hearing. Even this morning, actually, we've been in court trying to argue to basically publish further information. That case is ongoing. It's been really quite extraordinary, and we've had a lot of last-minute briefings to really iron out those details.
Just to step back into some of the domestic politics around this issue. So the leak happened under the Tory government. They took out the superinjunction and started this process off. We then have a Labour government coming in. Just explain how that process has continued.
So initially, Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, sought an injunction. He didn't actually seek a superinjunction. The judge then decided he upgraded it to a superinjunction. And he upgraded it on the 1st of September 2023, and that was the day that Grant Shapps became Defence Secretary, taking over from Ben Wallace. It was months later, then we had the general election, then Labour came into power. So then this was continued by Labour. This was continued to be fought for by Labour until January this year when John Healey ordered a review of the whole process. So the superinjunction continued whilst this review was ongoing. And then very recently he received the outcome of that review, and John, the Secretary of State, then decided that it should be lifted because the nature of the threat had changed, and the author of the review said that the threat he believed the threat to have diminished over time.
So he doesn't think there's as much risk of the Taliban carrying out reprisals?
Not as much risk, but there's still a risk, and that actually forms the basis of a fresh injunction that we've been hit with that is ongoing, where we aren't able to reveal the exact details of what was in that data list.
And we should say that there is also money involved in all of this. Just describe how much money has been set aside to deal with the implications of this leak.
At one point, there was a document that referred to a briefing with ministers, including Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. This meeting happened in October last year, and their ministers agreed to spend £7 billion over the next 5 years on bringing Afghans who had been affected by the data breach to the UK, and this referred to 25,000 Afghans. Now, we've published the story today, and the MOD is saying that that $7 billion specifically refers to all 3 Afghan schemes. So that's schemes that have been ongoing for a long time. That isn't clear from the document, and they admit that. What they say is that they will be spending $6 billion, not the $7 billion, on all 3 Afghan schemes going forward. They say that £850 million has either been spent or will be spent on bringing Afghans to the UK because their data has been breached. In reality, that's going to be more money because Afghans who have been affected by the data breach are also being brought under an existing policy. It's all extremely complicated, but there is a lot of money that is being spent on rectifying this issue.
Talk us through the numbers in terms of the people affected and the government's attempt to save people. How many of them were the government attempting to bring to Britain?
At one point, the government said 42,000 would come. That was in June, so very recently. And now they're saying that around 24,000 people who have been affected by the data breach are either here or will come. There's more than 5,000 more still to come here.
But not the full 42,000?
Not the full 42,000.
And that was 42,000 out of 100,000 who could be affected. That obviously means there are an awful lot of people in Afghanistan or neighbouring countries whose details might be out there, who could be affected by this, but for whom there's no help coming.
Exactly, and obviously those are the people that Secretary of State and others are going to be really worried about. And I think John Healey has made it clear that this has been a really difficult decision for the government to make.
And Larisa, you still speak to people in those circumstances. Just give us a sense of how desperate that news will be for them.
I think it's going to be incredibly worrying. I think they're not going to know what to do next. You know, I am bracing myself to receive a lot of questions from people that I know who are in Afghanistan. At this moment, they won't know whether they were on the list. They won't know what information is out there, what information the Taliban might find out about. They won't know what to do. And that's going to be extremely worrying for them. And it's going to be a really concerning next few days, I think.
And when you speak to them, do they still feel the threat of reprisals?
They do, and they're all working out what they do next. Some of them have got family members in Pakistan. Some have left Afghanistan in the hope that if they go to Pakistan, they might be brought to the UK. There are others obviously still in the country just hoping that they will be evacuated. There's this hope that the British government might let them in. And there are still some people that have been accepted but are still waiting to actually get here. And that's going to be really worrying for them too, because they won't know if the Taliban suddenly get the list.
And just give us a sense of how scared they are of the Taliban.
Person A describes real fear. She describes that, the Taliban are going around killing people that they know who helped the UK or served alongside UK forces during the war. She, really describes this sense of fear and the idea that people are still in hiding and they're continually moving house. Often the actual applicants, so the Afghans that believe they have a case to come to the UK, won't be near their family members because they're afraid of being at home, because they don't know when they'll be targeted. They can't always stay in touch with their family members. There are concerns already in Afghanistan about using phones and personal security. And I think it's fair to say that these people are still terrified about what the future holds for them.
Yesterday afternoon, after the lifting of the superinjunction and when the story broke, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, made a statement to Parliament.
Mr. Speaker, this serious data incident should never have happened. It may have occurred 3 years ago under the previous government, but to all those whose information was compromised, I offer a sincere apology today on behalf of the British government.
You've been hearing from the defence editor for The Times, Larisa Brown. You can read more about this story and the Times' battle to bring it to light at thetimes.com with a subscription. The producer today was Edward Drummond. The executive producer was Dan Box. Sound design was by Hannah Farrell and theme composition was by Mal Lassetto. If you can, do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. See you again tomorrow.